All right, folks, welcome back to the Property Couch podcast. And have we got a wonderful episode for you today? We have a returning guest who's got a book called Mind Over Money. And we're going to talk about behavioural economics. And before you go, I'm sure if I want to listen to that, I promise you, this will well be worth it. We're going to talk about a concept called loving the scary ugly, Ben. We are going to talk about spendvesting. What else are we going to talk about?
Yes, so there's money cognition, which talks to that behavioural economic stuff, and hang around to the end. We can't do an episode without Evan where we don't get an economic, or most importantly, interest rate update. Where are we going from here? Are we close, or are we already there to a pause?
Are we close? It's important to stick around for that, folks. But let's rip into the show.
Welcome to the Property Couch, where each week you get to listen to two of Australia's leading experts. Bryce Holdaway, co-host of Location Australia on Foxtel's Lifestyle Channel, co-host of Escape from the City on the ABC, and partner of Empower Wealth Advisory. Ben Kingsley, chair of Property Investors Council of Australia and the founder of Empower Wealth Advisory, named the 2018 and 2019 Property Advisory Firm of the Year. Stay tuned as they bring you the insider's guide to property, finance, and money management.
All right, folks, welcome back to the Property Couch. Welcome back to you too, mate. How are you?
Oh, good, buddy. Yourself?
I'm pretty good. Interest rates went up again. That's a surprise. Not?
Not?
Yes. So
We're still spending too much, mate. We're still spending too much.
So, but the tone has gone from hawkish to a little perhaps dovish, but giving some people some hope. But I think the general chatter around the coffee shops is hopefully it's starting to land for people. So if anyone wants to listen to your interpretation, go into the catalogue. You talk to that. You spend a lot of time digesting and understanding the data. So feel free to check into that if you haven't. And our very special guest today has promised at the end of our conversation, we're going to talk about interest rates as well. So make sure you stick around for that. But Ben, with interest rates going up, people obviously need to get a sense of certainty. So you want to talk to the money stretch story about how people can get some certainty.
Yeah, it's just a reminder that inside the Moorr platform, we have a really fantastic, simple to use tool that will allow you to get some confidence and line of sight on how much money buffer or cash flow buffer you've got. So I've reshot a brand new tutorial video on that, and it's going to be in the show description. So you'll see a link straight in the show description where you can go and have a look at the tutorial video. And then if that's inspiring you to then obviously create an account inside Moorr, it's free to set up. Here's my recommendation. Download it on your mobile phone, do the onboarding through that because it's a really nice experience with a smart assistant Opti helping you in terms of getting you set up correctly. And then you'll have to pivot into the web version and then log in through the desktop version, the web version, and then you'll see the money stretch feature there and you can start playing around with it, put it into a sandpit, and then basically have a look at your numbers. Because what we're going to learn also from the conversation that we've got with our special guest today is we don't want you making really silly decisions in the short term because you panicked. Don't panic, people. Don't have that loss aversion story coming all over you. That's the message here, Bryce.
All right. Thanks for that, Ben. We also, last week we had the 5-star, the call out for 5-star reviews for Moorr. So I just want, there's a lot of people took that up and did that. So I just want to say thank you to those folks. And for anyone who gave us a written review, Ben, we're going to give them a copy of the Start and Build course. So just reach out to us.
Well, that's very nice. A bit of prompt. Well done, mate.
Well,
that's great.
People are adding value into our world.
I agree. No, thank you very much for everyone who did give us a 5-star review. So, I love the fact that if you've given us a written one, we've got a nice little course coming your way.
Yeah. So for those of you that gave a 5-star review and you didn't do a written one, read between the lines. If you want to update your review to a written one, let us know, and you know what that looks like. So Start and Build course to those who've done a written review. Hey, we also gave out some free gifts last week, Ben.
Yeah, so obviously to celebrate our birthday, we decided to try something new, and well, what can I say? Popular? Yeah. So I can give you some rough stats. I think it's really interesting, right? So over 6,000 reports have been generated by our awesome community. And I'll give you some, so almost coming up to 2,000 people who have taken advantage of these free Suburb reports. The other thing that's also interesting in the data as I'm looking at it is that there are 2,600 odd suburb or markets, I should say. So remembering that, so our reports do suburb by house or suburb by unit for their levels of demand, supply, and all the activity in those particular things. So obviously, most popular was houses. That's pretty logical to remember that, but that just gives you some idea. And so, Bryce, what we've decided to do, and we've talked about this before we kicked
What are you doing, Ben? Have we talked about this? What are you doing?
Well, I just love the fact that, everyone's got behind their birthday celebration. So another 7 days. Another 7 days.
Maybe you didn't mention this in the pre-show.
But it doesn't matter if you haven't. If you already got your 5, I'm sorry, but thank you. But there's not another 5 for you. You will still be unable to do any more than that. But if you haven't already, because we gave it 7-day window, and obviously that's now elapsed. So we're now kicking on for another 7 days. So if you haven't been one of those people who have taken advantage, jump on board. A little tip also for those playing along who don't read the little notes in there. You've got to do them one at a time.
One at a time.
So don't try and do all 5 at a time. Sometimes it'll get a bit glitchy. So just do it one at a time. Put the code in. Sorry, yes, it's not as easy, but because we just came up with the idea without changing all of our back-end technology, because we wanted to give away a lot of free value, that's why you have to do it that way. So if you haven't done it, jump on board. You can get 1 if you want. You can get 2, 3, 4, or 5 free reports.
So to summarise, folks, we turned 8 a couple of weeks ago. We thought we'd give out some free gifts. Ben has just extended it without giving me any lead notice on that, which is great news. There was almost 2,000 people who did that last week. And today is Thursday, the 9th of March. So that will close on Thursday, the 16th of March, 2023. Ben, and unless have you got any plans?
Well, you give away start and build report, so I thought I'd get in on the show and start giving away.
Yeah, well done, mate. Nice work. Love it. Our community will be the beneficiaries of that. So, and out of interest, folks, most reports, the state with the most reports downloaded was Queensland. Ben. Queensland,
followed by Victoria.
Yes. So, and New South Wales, you thought you'd be number 1, but you weren't. You were 3rd. So there we go. All right. My Mindset Minute today is a James Clear quote. Ben, there's no secret that I love James Clear and I love the way that he thinks. Have a listen to this one. Doesn't make any sense to continue wanting something if you're not willing to do what it takes to get it. If you don't want to live the lifestyle, then release yourself from the desire. To crave the result, but not the process, is to guarantee disappointment. I thought, oh, that's good. Because I think if you want $2,000 per week, Ben, it actually requires you to be willing to do what it takes to get it. It requires you to self-educate. It requires you to delay gratification. It requires you to be comfortable with zeros, Ben. It requires you to be comfortable with lending and multiple lending. It requires you to be comfortable. Here's the big one, not for everyone, Ben. It requires you to be comfortable with interest rate movements. It requires you to follow a budgeting system. It requires you to expand your time horizon. You can't talk in years, Ben. You have to talk in decades if you want $2,000 a week. It requires small habits compounding over time, and it requires you to swim upriver. Think about that one. If only 73% of all property investors stop at 1 and not many people buy 1, you're swimming upriver. So it's more about the behaviour than the mechanics. And of course, Ben, I've talked about this as our Mindset Minute today as a lead into the very special guest that we had on the podcast today. Very busy man, made some time to talk to us. We spoke to Evan yesterday. Let's cut to the interview you and I had recently with Evan Lucas. All right, Ben, we've got a very special guest today. We are chatting with Evan Lucas. Evan is an experienced market strategist and a natural communicator and educator. You'll see that shortly, Ben. He's very, very good with words. He has loved markets since his days of sitting with his grandfather and mulling over his investment portfolios. What he learned from his early experiences is that investing habits, strategies, and behaviors do not necessarily translate across families, generations, or peers. This led him to become fascinated with behavioural finance throughout his career, which has taken him to the Netherlands, the UK, and back to Australia over a decade and a half. His biggest learning from his time working in these markets, investing and finance, is that our individual behaviour towards money is always different and always changing. Evan is a regular media commentator for the ABC television and radio news, The Project, SBS World News, The Today Show, Sky News, Channel News, Asia, Bloomberg, and more. And he's also a returning guest, Ben, having spoken to us about 2 days after the very first interest rate rise last year, back on May the 5th, on episode 389. Welcome back to the Property Couch, Evan.
Thank you guys for having me. I love being with you too. This is going to be a lot of fun the next 45 minutes to an hour because, as your listeners know, the three of us can really talk. So let's see if we can actually manage to get it into a level that's actually understandable and not some, absolute gobfest that I know that the two of us can, or three of us can get onto. So yes.
Well, that's our mission, right? To make sure that it lands at the level that everyone can understand. But a bit has changed. We spoke to you May the 5th, last year being 2022. And on May the 3rd, the RBA board raised the cash rate for the first time in a long time for about 1.2 million property owners at the time who had never experienced an interest rate rise. And here we are 10 interest rate rises later talking to you. So that's changed. But also what else has changed, mate, is you became an author. Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. Becoming an author. And I still, again, we're going to talk about psychology. We're going to talk about that mind thought process. And you two know this better than I do because you have not just been an author once over, you've been an author twice over, the both of you. It's getting ahead. Do you call yourself that? I mean, one of my, people that I absolutely admire is someone like James Clear, and he talks about habit. And one of them is about being and accepting you being something. And he talks about being an author. He now calls himself and has to do it over and over and over again, repeating the habit, repeating the conversation that I'm an author. So yes, thank you. I am now a published author. It was an amazing thought bubble to actual. And what I mean by that is that it was my COVID thought process from my best mate who decided that it was a very good idea for me to write a book. He said, you've got lots to talk about because you do that all day. So you put it into words, it'll turn it into something else. And away you went. And then from that thought bubble to speaking with the publisher who you and I both use in Leslie Williams at Major Street Publishing, to it actually being a thing, has been an absolute whirlwind, because the last time that you and I spoke, I was probably a little bit worried. I was blocked up, and the two of you helped me at heaps just to get that last kick, and that last 30,000 words fell out in a month. So it was quite a process indeed.
So what we need to be saying really to everyone is, I'm an investor. I'm an investor. I'm an investor, because that's the message we want to get out to our community, isn't it? Is like, actually, I am an investor. I invest in my life. I invest in my home. I invest in investments as part of that story state strategy, that narrative that we tell ourselves.
Yeah, and it's a weird thing to say, but you're right, Ben, in the fact that habit is what we're trying to form here. And the two of you do that, all day, every day with what we are now into, 433 of these? Congratulations in terms of what you are. But that is a repetitive habit that you've been building with your listeners, is about believing and understanding that what you're doing becomes habit. It becomes who and what you want to become. It also changes your view. It orientates. And this is what my sort of absolute, love is around why behavioral finance is my thing, is your behavior will therefore create levels of change. It creates the ability to give you better habits to allow you to do better things. And look, one of the things that I talk about, and we're going a little bit off script, but I always ask the question to people is, what is money to you? And that question will be asked all the time by me, with every time a different answer. It might be similar, but they'll be different. And the reason I ask you that is because we're all different. We've all experienced different things. But in the end, my answer is, when I get that question, is I want financial autonomy. And by financial autonomy, I want to do what I want, when I want, how I want. And having that level of control, and I talk about this in the book as well, it is known. So the American Journal of Psychology found the highest level of response by human beings is that what they want more than anything is autonomy. And that's what you guys do here with the Property Couch, talking about how property can give you that freedom. I do it the same, just in a different vein. Autonomy is absolutely what in here you probably want. And I'm pointing to my head if you listen to this on the podcast. That is the whole idea of giving yourself that chance to enjoy what you find most important to you, whatever that happens to be. family, travel, experience, adventure, and everything in between. That is what I'm trying to get to in my life. And I hope that's what, you might take out of this as well.
Folks, stick around to the end because we're going to ask for Evan's insights around a couple of things. Interest rates at the moment is obviously topical. There's talk of lots of changes to superannuation, so we'll talk about those towards the end.
Mm-hmm.
In the previous episode, we spoke to you. We normally start the podcast by saying, "Tell us a little bit about your conversations you had over the dinner table." You did talk about that extensively back in episode 389. But just as a quick summary, Evan, for everyone who hasn't heard that one yet, and for today, there was two key points that I want to lean in with you. Your grandfather had a fair bit to do, and you talk about this in the book.
Yep.
And also, last time we caught up, you said your mum had started investing in property, not in property, in the equities market.
Both now.
Oh, both now. So a little update on those, but just a quick summary on what money was like growing up and the influence that your grandfather had.
Yep. So quick summary is this: we didn't talk about it. Right. So in the Lucas household, talking about money was a taboo subject because they didn't want to burden their kids with that idea. That, I've always said, has been a mistake. With my grandfather, the reason I got into it was because I used to watch him sit in front of the newspapers back in the day, and they don't really do it anymore, opening up the middle page of the finance section where every final close of every listed company on the ASX 200 was there, and he'd copy down the prices to work out where his portfolio was because he didn't really use computers. And I got into it from there. So I used to sit with him and talk to him about it. What is he doing? Why did he do this? How did he do that? And that was sort of that, along with golf, was the way that he and I identified together. All of that was amazing because by the end of it, he had this incredible portfolio that he, A, never talked about, B, nobody really knew anything about, and C, he didn't pass that habit that we've just discussed onto his 4 kids. And that was quite fascinating. And again, that's what I think our family then the word is mistake, was that our culture was not to talk about money because it's that Australian thing, that tall poppy syndrome thing. It's that, that subject that's just a little bit, probably there's almost something obtuse about it, something wrong that, it's just this thing that you don't really want to talk about it because it's a taboo subject. And that for me is fascinating because the other final part of that is what's been interesting about the book and my travels and my experiences is that you go to the US and when they talk about money, they're so proud about it. They are so open about how they talk about money, their term back the billionaire, the collective good of everybody making money. They think that way. And they find it very interesting when they talk to people like us, coming from a culture where talking about money is a taboo subject. And that was my learning thing from my family, was that unfortunately talking about money was not a thing to do. And because of that, the experiences across my family with money are vastly different from me to my sister, my cousins, and everything else in between.
And that makes a lot of sense, right? Because we also know throughout history that the exchange of ideas and the openness of conversation creates awareness, understanding, knowledge building, innovation in those particular spaces. So That's why we are so passionate about it. And it's sort of, for me, probably one of the big questions I had when I read the book, and congratulations, it's a great read.
Thanks,
it's really easy to absorb and it's easy to take away some of those really simple, big picture themed ideas that you can start to put into your day-to-day. But I wanted to explore the concept of the old brain in that sort of delayed gratification piece. So can you sort of expand a little bit on that in terms of how you've positioned that in the book and how you see that more broadly?
Yeah, so what Ben's talking about there is that when I first came out of school, bright-eyed and completely, into the wilderness, I was always told that the best thing I could do was to go into medicine. And so I thought that was what I wanted to do. So I didn't get in through the undergrad program, which is what most people do. And I ended up going in through medical science in Adelaide. And my first sit down was a physical anthropology lecture. And the guy stood up there and basically said, we physiologically are almost identical to our ancestors from 35,000 years ago. In terms of what they've done is they've studied your brain. The volume of a human now, brain capacity to the volume back then is exactly the same, give or take, right? And it's within a statistical error. Physiologically, we're pretty similar as well. And it explains why over time, and I talk about this, and he did the same thing when we did the lecture, was that it's why you can see through history, human beings have been able to do what they've done. Build the pyramids, the Great Wall. You've had geniuses like Plato and Socrates and Hypatia and all these kinds of people through thousands, millenniums of years. But what I talk about and what Ben's question is that the difference between our ancestors back then and today is our lifestyle. And back in the day, we had what you would call, basically instant gratification, which was, there was no, it's called instant choice.
Hunt and gather. Yeah.
Hunter and gather. And it is that. You'd literally go and find food, you'd eat it, find shelter, you'd sleep. The seasons happened and it rolled by, and that was just accepted practice. Now, what it is that we have what we call delayed returns. And physiologically, we're not geared to this, but delayed returns is making a decision today on the hope, and that's the right word, hope, that the decision pays off in the future. And that can be anything. And why I mean that, you go today to go and do a job interview on the hope that you get that job to give you some income in the future, right? That's a decision you've made to go on. And it's even as, what are we going to have dinner in 2 days' time? You go to the shop and you buy your food for 2 days' time, not to eat it right now. So it's called delayed returns. And that's, in our world, the biggest thing that we need to overcome as investors, which is making a decision today, particularly in property is a great example, to obviously do an upfront large investment choice for the future gains in not just next week, not just next year, not just in 5 years' time, but in 10, 15, and 20 years' time. And time is the thing that we're discussing here, the ability for human beings to not just grasp it, but to accept it and look into the future of it.
Yeah, so you make a statement here, humans are naturally short-term impatient, but long-term patient. That speaks to this point too, isn't it? That and you've got this concept in the book called hyperbolic discounting. Can you talk to those 2 points?
So this is one of the most fascinating things around what I was doing when I did the studies for the books. So hyperbolic discounting is the complete opposite idea to what you would think. And what I mean by that is that human beings, as you said, are short-term impulsive and short-term impatient, but long-term patient, which is completely opposite to what we do in investing. And what I mean by that is that if you ask somebody what they expect to get in a year's return, it will be some form of unrealistic number, most likely mid to low double digits, 10 to 25% per annum, all right? Which is completely unrealistic. And the long-term view that they have is it's more realistic. It gets to about 9%, right? And that is not what you're taught in investment world. In the full rational world, long-term investing should return you 25, 30, 40, 50, 60% because of compound interest and the beauty of it. But we don't think like that. So hyperbolic discounting takes that into effect in that it shows that it may be the reason why, because we're short-term impulsive, we will take short-term risk and do short-term, mistakes is probably the word. One of the most beautiful parts of studying into hyperbolic discounting, which is why it's hyperbolic, is that it actually goes in like a concave shape. So the less amount of time, the more we expect a return. It's why things like cryptocurrency are so appealing, because it absolutely taps into hyperbolic discounting, the possibility of getting not just 25% return in a year or in a couple of days. It's, hundreds of percent in terms of what's been going on.
And Evan, I want to build on that because it's also reinforced in the marketing that's done. Now, prior to regulation coming into the financial services space, there was a lot of claims and, sort of percentage gains. And so we naturally respond, 22% gain or a 30% gain or crypto, 154% gain. I can still see, AFR articles and all of those types of things where we're seeing that. We've got a lot of people in the property space who cheekily sort of do cash on cash returns. So 63% return in the last 9 months. And then you start to read it and you say, well, actually, that's not the technical return. Yes, that's the return on the money you've invested, but the overall return on the property. And so we are, through this type of aggressive marketing, we're reinforcing that play. And so to Evan's point, and to anyone who's listening along, what we're saying is you want sustainable, long-term, powerful growth that you're getting. And it's obviously reinforced in your book, Morgan Housel's book, in terms of that psychology of money. All of that is true in terms of, so we spend all of our time passionately telling people, plan a tree today, because in the future, it's going to grow into something that will forever, continue to fill that out. So I just wanted to add that story because and I think that sets the book up beautifully in terms of talking about, okay, here's why we are, and if we accept that in terms of why we are, but here's the informed knowledge from people who are subject matter experts in this area to be able to do that.
And further to that, I'll come back to hyperbolic, Bryce's question about hyperbolic density. To get further to your point there, Ben, what you're also talking about there is biases, right? So our human biases, our attraction to things, and you've just highlighted perfectly what is probably a combination of confirmation bias and attention bias. So attention bias is something I highlight from the GameStop theory, and it's the same thing with crypto. If everyone is doing it, it must be right. Right? If everybody is getting into this area and doing this, and I'm seeing them making thousands of %, it must be right. Your attention is caught on it. It confirms your thought process as well. So your confirmation bias causing you to act. And that's exactly what we're talking about here. When we talk about investing, it's all about basically trying to conquer emotion. I mean, that's really another simple way of talking about what we're doing. You are trying to basically conquer your emotions to have as much of and I use the term reasonable in the book, a reasonable decision making, because as I argue in the book, and I'm not going to go into it, but having absolute 110% rational economic thought process is impossible because we're not machines and we're not a computer, but we're reasonable. But that also means we do and are open to mistakes, and biases. All they are, it's just a fancy way of saying shortcutting behavior, right? So if you can shortcut, you can shortcut. So as you just highlighted perfectly, Ben, if everyone's doing it, it must be right. Therefore, I don't have to do any more research. Bang, I'm going to do it.
And that will then create in a marketplace irrational exuberance.
Yeah.
And that's why we have peaks and troughs, or what we call booms and busts, because you get on this whole, and then there's the recency bias that also reinforces that. Everyone else is killing it. Everyone else is killing it on GameStop, so away we go. And then the irrational exuberance kicks in, and then there's no fundamentals. We move away from fundamentals, and then we see the big correction that comes at the end of the day.
And bring it all the way back to the first question, what is money to you? I bet you it's not that. Right? I bet you what your original idea of investing was to do, which was to create, for me, financial autonomy. That is not financial autonomy, right? That doesn't get me to my goal of reaching financial autonomy, because it's going to distract me from what I need to do as a whole, which is I still want to have the ability to go and hang out with my family. I still want to go and do X, Y, Z. If I am caught up in attention bias, confirmation bias traits, then you are going to not only make a mistake, it's going to actually get you away from what you want to do.
Not investing, speculation. That's the word we're talking about here.
Correct. Bingo.
Yep. Hey, but I think we've, which is natural to the three of us, we've just sort of launched in, right? But I feel like we might want to let's set some scenes here, right? Because you've written a book, Mind Over Money, and the sub-line is why understanding your money behavior will improve your financial freedom, right? And I guess we've always said money is simple, behavior is hard. You wrote, I'll just get, humans are not rational. We are reasonable, we are functional, and we are practical. And I think we're really, well, a couple of things. Why did you arrive at that description? And I feel like we want to sit here for a little while, because I've seen so many people over the journey, been doing this for 20 plus years, where people set on a path and then they derail for reasons that defy logic, right? And it's one of the things where me and Ben often have a riff around the difference between the debt snowball and the debt avalanche. Ben's very much the debt avalanche, right? It doesn't make sense to pay off your debt in any way other than the most expensive first, whereas the people who are actually in debt problems do not act anywhere near rational. So therefore, you actually have to game them. So that's why the debt snowball works, because you need to play. So he and I often have a little bit of a playful back and forth about, debt snowball doesn't work. I'm like, well, debt avalanche doesn't work for the people that are in trouble, right? So can we just sit around this for a little bit? Because I think it's really important for anyone who's listening to this that the behavior stuff really matters. And why can't we think rationally?
Because the reason we do think rationally, but we have other reasonable considerations on top of us. So what I mean by that is it's how you define rationality. So when I do it, and what you two do, I know you probably come from an investment/economics point of view, right? So the reason I say that is rational economics believes that you will maximize at every single point in the cycle your capital or your investment. That's just not true, because we can't do that, right? And the perfect economic argument that's been made about that is that if you're a young person, you should actually be not just putting your money in all of it to work, but you should be actually leveraging up on it, right? Because that is maximizing at the time, blah, blah, blah. That, no, right?
Not into volatile markets.
No, exactly, right. And not only that, you can't predict volatile markets, right? So systematic risk is part and parcel of what we do. By systematic risk, that is risk that you cannot control. That is geopolitical tensions, broader macro issues, inflation, higher interest rates, that kind of stuff. That is part and parcel of life. So it gets back to the reasonable point. Because not only that, getting back to my humanistic thing with regards to physical anthropology, you don't realize, but you make roughly 35,000 decisions every day. And they're very, very simple to complex ones. But it also means that when you're making an investment decision, there are those other decisions coming in over the top. If I was to invest all of my money on leverage, like I just gave to example, how does that give my ability for me to function with my family? Probably doesn't. So I need to make a reasonable decision about what's good for my long-term financial stability and autonomy, but also the financial stability / my now needs for my family, or whether or not it means as simple as going, if I was to invest all that money now as a 20 to 25-year-old, that means I can't do what I probably should be doing in my 20s, which is actually, really getting that life experience. Again, this is my personal point of view. Do want to point that out? Because I think what's really interesting, over the last period, I've come in contact with some amazing people in the FIRE community. And for those of you who don't know what FIRE is, it's financial independence, retire early. But what's so fascinating them, and Ben, you said it before, sorry, Bryce, you said it before, about when they had that clash, right? They've had this very, very strong, long-term, very rational goals, which is save, invest, get to the $1.125 million sort of magical bracket that they've referred to, and then be able to live off it. What's been very interesting to talk to some of them about now that they've got into their early 30s that have done this is the reasonable problem comes about, right? So the reasonable problem, their partner needs to go and do more education, therefore they're not going to be in the workforce. A family comes along. They need to actually start realizing they need to buy a property and live in it. All of these things that can destroy a goal. There's nothing wrong with that because it's a reasonable decision to be having. So that's the way to answer that question, is that life is a reasonable thing. And decisions about life is a reasonable part of your investment strategy. It just means that your investment strategy has to have the ability to bend and mold for that longer term idea, whether it's FIRE or whether it's me, financial autonomy. That's the difference, in my view, between rational and reasonable thinking.
And coming to the behavioural economics, which is really a study of how we do act, you also highlight, which, from the great book Thinking Fast and Slow, that with those 35,000 decisions, a lot of those quick decisions that we make, thank you, Daniel Kaufman, unbelievable book. If you haven't read it, it's fascinating.
Dense. It's dense, but it's beautiful.
Yeah, it's a piece of art. It's
Yep.
an incredible piece of art for those of you who want to understand. But this comes back to Bryce's point and to your point, is that because we make a lot of decisions very, very quickly, when it comes to investing, our default position is a fast decision.
Yep.
Want to invest that, don't want to, whereas because we know the cognitive load, that really does frustrate us, and we naturally don't like being in that slow thinking state. And so investing are big decisions. And so a lot of people put those decisions off because it's like there's just too much effort involved. I'm unsure of the answer. Whereas, putting on thinking of which shirt I'll wear for the day is a decision, but it doesn't have the consequence that what a decision of spending hundreds of thousands of dollars will over time. And so, to your point, and what you're trying to drill home in the book there and in your book is this concept of, when it comes to these types of decisions, simplify it and make it easier to do.
Yep. And that's exactly, so it gets back to what we just talked at the start. Simplifying means also developing habit, right? So when you go into a simplified scenario, it's much easier to make that a habit, and that habit therefore becomes a constant behavior.
Hey folks, real quick, I want to share with you that Ben and I have created a lifestyle design app called Moorr. That's Moorr. And it's the home of money smarts, wealth speed, and wealth clock. And and we're very excited to share it with you, our Property Couch community. Do you know your wealth speed? What about the value of your wealth clock? Find out now by going to www.moorr.com.au. That's MOOR.com.au. It's completely free and available now. All right, now let's get back to the show.
Because what we know, and again, looking at someone like Daniel Kahneman, who, if for those who didn't see because on the podcast, I had the book up on screen. He, again, is somebody I also rather admire, and you'll see that if you read my book. As he talks about, just knowing about your behavior is not enough to actually change it.
No.
Right. And we all know that anyway. I mean, that's not a hard statement to make. But as he points out in Thinking Fast and Slow and some of his new books around the sort of noise, is that yeah, the three of us can sit here and tell you about hyperbolic discounting. We can tell you about confirmation bias, attention bias, rational, all that kind of stuff.
Bias, all of them. There's heaps of them. Thousands of them.
Knowing them is great, but that doesn't fix the problem. Or not the problem, doesn't fix your behavior.
The decision making. Yeah.
Yes.
Yep.
So non-decision making is just as detrimental as making rash decisions. The ability to put decisions off is, again, it's a bias. And that's what actually won Kahneman and also his partner in Amos Tversky the Nobel Prize when they actually went through and talked to you about loss aversion. So that's the next thing to talk about. Loss aversion is the most known bias in behavioral finance in the finance world, which is that we know that if you were to, and the simple argument always has been, if you were to put your hand in your pocket right now, pull out $50, you'd get an elation. The studies show that sort of kick you get can last as much as a couple of hours. If, however, you knew that $50 was in your pocket, you put your hand in there and you can't find it, and then can't find it at all, and you've lost it, you can hold on to that loss for weeks, not just a day, not just a week, weeks, and you can dwell on it. And it's the decision making. If I don't make a decision, I can't lose. So that is why loss aversion is just as bad in non-decision making as making rash decisions. And so that's what we're also talking about here, is that if you are those people that need that little bit of additional bump, if that's the word, to start, then that is where, again, the behavior changes happen. I talk about it a bit in the book. It is like, and my thing is always talking about, because I like sport, but running a marathon, you don't just walk out the front door and run 42 kilometers, right? You walk out and probably run a K and see how you're going. You then, over the next couple of days, you run that K a couple of times over. Then you push it out to 3, to 5, to 8, to 16, and so on and so forth before you can run a marathon. That takes months. Probably even some people it will take a couple of years to get to that level. Why would you expect your ability to invest like that? It's just not going to happen. You need to develop steps. So that means if you are prone to not making a decision, start with just looking at your bank account and hopefully seeing that it's growing from the income you get from working. Then once you do that, maybe put some of that money into as simple as a term deposit. It's your next step, right? That's going from the 1 kilometer to the 2 kilometer, and so on and so forth. Because once you start developing those habits of getting away from no decision, you can get to the level that, Ben and Bryce talk about, which is investing in your future with an asset like property that can return you something beautiful over a very long period of time and almost forever.
Well, hopefully some people that are listening to what you've just said there, Evan, let that marinate a bit, because maintaining status quo is a version of, is loss aversion, right? So, but clearly what they know is they've been to a barbecue and they've talked to someone who owned a property for the last 10, 20 years, and they go, geez, you were lucky because you've owned that property for that period of time. But the reality was back then when that person made that decision, they overcame that status quo and that loss aversion bias by actually taking action and doing something. And I feel like if someone's listening to this and they're like, oh, I've been wanting to do that for a little while, even if it's in your world, which is in the equity space, or in our world, which is property, because you and I both spoke about exactly the same thing. It's lifestyle design through that autonomy that you spoke about, and we just choose varying vehicles.
Yeah.
But there's a couple of chapters in your book that the one that I love them, and there's lots, and I want to encourage everyone to read it, right? But the one I loved was chapter 9, which was loving the scary ugly.
Oh yeah.
And I think if you sort of combine that with chapter 12 of Spendvesting, because you talked about James Clear before and building up those habits, can you Can you? There's a beautiful graph in there about the beautiful I think from memory it's 9.8% return. It's a wonderful looking graph and it gets everyone inspired. But then you turn the page and you go, actually, to get to that beautiful looking graph, it actually looks like this. Can you talk to that? Because I feel like if you embrace the scary ugly, that helps you overcome status quo and this loss aversion bias.
Yeah, so you and I clearly work in markets because we love titles like this. So why I say that? Not only that, it's interesting. So the 9.8% at the time of writing, it's a little bit less now, was the average return of the ASX on a total returns basis over the previous 10 years. And when you look at that chart, 9%, 9.8% per annum on a compounding interest chart, it is a beautiful upward trend, exponentially growing chart.
Yeah.
Right. And it showed that over 10 years, if you had invested in that period on the compound number, you would have made 155% return.
Yeah.
Which is true. That is non-disputable. That is a fact. But what Bryce is talking about, when you turn the page over, what I've actually shown you is what 9.8% annual average return looks like. It is a very, very ugly, ugly chart. It is up, down, flat, up, down, flat, very, very steep up, very, very steep down returns. But it still gets you over that same period of time to 155% return on an average of 9.8%. What I also highlight is this. In that period of time from when I wrote the book to the back 10 years, so I finished the book writing in June 2022, so before what's gone on lately. But the reason I say that is that if you actually have a look at all those years back, when was the last time the ASX actually gave you 9.8% per annum? The answer is zero. It never has, because it's the average. Now, the closest it got to, if I remember off the top of my head, was 2016, and it was about 11 and a bit percent.
Oh, you're good.
And that's as close as it got to that average. But if you remember, 2021 was incredible, right? 2021, there was a 20% increase in the ASX 200. COVID year, 2020, the ASX actually finished up about 3% after all of that rubbish that happened in that year with regards to markets and then the horrible health events. You go back to 2015-16, China hard landing. You've got the Euro crisis thrown in there in 2011 and 12. You've got 2018-19 when I call it the Cheshire Cat scenario, where at the time, Jay Powell had just taken over the chair at the Fed and was sitting there in October 2018, smiling about how perfect things were. And the S&P then decided to fall out of bed and decline 24% between that day and Christmas Eve. Mm-hmm. And then rallied another 27% in the preceding 3 months. That is the scary ugly. That is the short-term problem. That gets back to Bryce's question to me before about hyperbolic discounting, about why it's so attractive. Because if you're seeing these kinds of moves, it can do one of two things. Get you out of it because it's too scary to get involved, or it's so attractive that you get caught up in the short term. And so it's about understanding that the scary ugly is part and parcel. I use the example again of something that I love doing, which is rock climbing. So I look at Alex Hollande, who's a guy who scaled El Capitan, which is the largest face in the States in Yosemite National Park, free solo. He did it without a rope. So it's 995 meters from floor to ceiling. And he climbed the whole thing in 4 hours without a rope. Now, everyone listening to that, that is a risk too far. But to him, it's fine. But he loves that kind of risk. So what I'm trying to say is that if you can embrace that markets are going to do that, but you can then remember that the smoothed out scenario is going to give you that return, that's embracing the scary ugly.
Mm.
Can I build?
Sorry, Ben. It's just if people can get that, I think it can shift the dial on status quo. I think it can shift the dial on loss aversion, because it was like a spiritual moment when I read that bit, and I'm like, that is just a beautiful way to put that, because we all fall in love with the fact that if you buy a $250,000 property 20 years ago, 10 years ago it was 500,000, and then now it's $1 million, and in 10 years' time it's probably going to be 2 million. Everyone loves that story, right? But it's the actual in the market up during COVID, 10 interest rate rises in a row, all of that volatility in between. And it's only if you extend your time horizon and start talking, if your narrative becomes a time horizon of decades, not years, then that's when you get to enjoy that in your own name.
Yeah.
When people have a narrative and a time horizon, to your point around hyperbolic discounting, which is too short, they status quo will always win. And that's why, you'll be able to riff the stats for equities. But for us, of the very small percentage of the population who invest in property, only 73% of them buy one, and then 91% buy one or two. So not many people get to three. And it's if they just get this beautiful concept in their mind and it lands, oh wow, so many people can have that autonomy that you talked about.
Yeah, and not only that, I mean, it's so easy to concentrate on the negative, right? That again is what we're geared to, right? It's fight or flight. It is that simple, right? And in terms of what it is, the adrenaline that comes with safeguarding yourself is so much higher. So you look at right now, and let's talk about property. I mean, we are talking about a top to bottom move according to Core Logic. Let's use their data if that's what you want to use it. We're talking about 8.9%, right? It was actually now it's just gone 9% with what the data we've just seen. And that's from the peak in May last year, which is when you and I were speaking last, to where we are in February. And it's bottoming out. You can see that already. Forgetting that between May 2022 and the bottom of the market in 2020, it was up 28.9%. That's lost. That whole conclusion is lost on this discussion. It's the same if you go back to 2018-19, when the last time we had a property slowdown, where it fell 5.5%, and people were saying, this is it, this is the one, this is the end, this is the property market in Australia, with the perma bears love to say that's just going to go. All of a sudden, we're talking about rallying into COVID, another 16.5%, right? So I can do that with equities as well. I can do that even with bonds, right? I can go into the other thing about bonds. Bonds has been this really strange market. I know it's not something we normally ever talk about because it's so boring. I think it's amazing. That again, bonds have that same principle, even though they're much lower risk. They've had a risk period that is completely abnormal. We've just been through an abnormal period in property. We've been through an abnormal period, and we'll again in equities. All markets have a scary part, but if you look at them smoothed out over time, you can enjoy, and as you said, Bryce, learn to love it.
So, which brings us back to this point of the power of loss aversion. So the reason why we spend so much time, and we've done a couple of podcasts on it, Bryce has done a call out for people who are thinking about selling, because we want to talk to those people, because what your instant reaction and behavior is, markets are falling, I need to get out of this. So this is that power of, again, gains don't give us the same adrenaline, dopamine hit, but our losses, as we're watching the stock market go down, as we're watching the property market go down, but now as we're watching our household cash flow budget potentially now going into the red, where we're currently not, we're spending more than we're actually saving, that just really unsettles so many people.
Yep.
And they make short-term decisions, not thinking about, well, actually, you know what, we've still got about $150,000 in savings here. So even though we're going backwards $1,000 a month, that's basically 15 months or whatever that is, 150 months in terms of what that story looks like. So that's why we spend so much time in trying to coach and teach people to sort of say, patience, look at it from the outsider's view. Don't get too emotionally attached to it, because it's just a moment in time. But if we think about markets over the long term, the economic cycle over the long term, we come out the other side, don't we?
We do. And I actually want to ask both of you these questions. I think this is really important for your listeners. I know right now you guys must be having a lot of people call you about the structure of their loans and how to deal with exactly what you're talking about there, Ben, which is cash flow. What do you say to people that are coming to you right now that are going, I can't take this, I need to change my loan, I want to go into interest only, I want to go into ways of basically preserving the cash that I have? How do you deal with that emotional response, which we know, economically and rationally is not the idea? How do you guys go about dealing with that?
So we take people into concern, into insight. And so through insight, and the best tool we've got on the Moorr platform is our money stretch tool. And so that allows us to then say, here, let's take your current financial position, we throw it into this sandpit, and then we can quickly show them, here's, you've got over 3 years 36 months of buffer based on this current scenario. Then we can show them the stress testing around that. So again, it's about making the invisible visible, and their cognitive load is like, it's not easy for them to actually do that math and do it quickly. And in spreadsheets, it's not easy to see. So by building this in the platform, anyone can do it from home. You don't even need an advisor. You can actually play along at home, and we show them that comfort level. And that does bring them back to a rational, calmer mindset. But make no mistake, when interest rates go up or when a black swan event happens, don't think that we're also bulletproof. We're human as well.
Yeah.
We will have those moments in time where we're like, all right, well, that little, I did speculate in crypto. I've made it very clear to people that I'm always risking between 3 and 5% of my total wealth on basically blue sky, big hero shots that, and because my wealth is at a certain level that it's not going to have any material impact in terms of, but it could if I get one of these predictions right, basically, fast track or 10x my result. So, but I'm only risking 2 to 5% of that. But coming back to that point, it's like when that market's collapsing and I'm going to Jane, that 30 grand that I just, had to play around with and sort of dabble in the sort of this space, it's now 10 grand. How are you feeling about that? She's going, well, you're the boss in that, you're happy to risk
Betty,
that.
you didn't tell me, Ben.
Yeah. But it's like, again, $30,000 for me, and I don't want to sound, unconsiderate to those people who are challenged with cash flow at the moment, because that's real for a lot of households at the moment. But that's my point. And I've developed the muscle memory because I've been doing this, like Bryce said, for 25, 30 years. But if you hear my backstory, and my backstory, it is money was challenged in the household. My parents used to argue about money all the time, and I had to go through the exercise of incrementally changing my behaviors, my habits, and now I completely control money. It does not control me, but I still have maybe a moment, that weak moment of, what if interest rates do go to that? That's another 100,000 a year of additional repayments that I've got on my portfolio. Okay, go back to the facts, go back to my numbers, have a look. That's okay. I've got the buffers there. I'm all right. But that's how I would answer that question, Evan.
Lovely.
I think, Evan, you hinted at it before with James Clear. So clearly you've read Atomic Habits. We've had him on the podcast, seen him live up in the Gold Coast at ARIC. So what I love about that book is he said the goal shouldn't be the thing. The goal should be the habits, right? So we want to go to the gym. I want to go to the gym 3 days a week. That's not the goal. You should be setting the goal to be the habits. Put my shoes out, make sure that everything that's required for me to get into the car. Once I'm in the car, the gym happens. It's between my bed and the car where it happens. So I hinted at it before, and I wonder if we can just lean up, because I think it's the other part of your book that I really love, which is chapter 12 around Spendvesting.
Yep.
That's important, and I think if someone grasps that concept, again, some of that inertia through status quo and loss aversion can be overcome.
Correct. And yes, it's a made-up word that I deliberately put in there, spendvesting. But the reason I do it is because spending has been biologically assessed as something that creates, and Bryce used the term before, a trigger in dopamine. In fact, it's not even the spending itself, it's the anticipation. So it gets back to your point around, and they've actually measured this, that your dopamine level actually peaks out in the lead to the spend event. It's the same thing, again, same analogy that James Clear and what Bryce just made around, the going to the gym. It's not the actual gym itself, it's the lead to the gym that can actually cause the difference. So my argument is that if you get joy and get triggered with joy through dopamine hits of spending, can you make investing the same thing, spendvesting? Can you change that ability to, even if it's just as simple as if you go to the supermarket and cheekily buy a chocolate bar each time you do that, can you turn that chocolate bar into the investment? I mean, there are players out there in the world that have now, platforms that have created that idea that instead of that chocolate bar or, what have you, round up to $30 from $29.95, that 5 cents goes in, and, in the States, it's acorns. It's the same. It's tapping into this idea that if you can turn your spending habits into an investment habit, get the same dopamine kick out of that anticipation of buying something, by investing in something, then that will develop that change. That will develop that ability to get to the car, if that's the analogy you want to use, to go to the gym, or to get to the ability to say, actually, instead of the money going out of my credit card, it's actually in my investment account, ready to go into the investment that I'm doing, saving the deposit for the house that I want to buy, going into the market and buying, a simple exchange traded fund, whatever it happens to be, and then constantly doing that. And then changing it from maybe not just the cheeky chocolate bar you're buying, but maybe that piece of apparel that you buy once every 3 months or once a month or what have you, that does give you the kick. Instead of doing it every month, every third month, you put it into the investment thing. And then you wind it back again every 2 out of 3. By all means, again, we are not saying don't invest in yourself, don't spend on yourself. That's not what it is, because again, the old adage, you don't want to end up being the richest person in the cemetery. And spending is a good thing. Don't get me wrong. Spending is a part and parcel of what makes you feel the way you feel. It gives you control over your life. That's what we've also proven. But it does also have now slightly other connotations, that it doesn't give you the ability in the future to do what you want because you've got less money now. So that is spendvesting. It's about seeing investing the same way you might see spending and changing your mindset from that. Again, everything I just described is incremental, if you can hear it as well. It's very slow, it's very steady, it takes time. James Clear, as we just said, habits are not something that are formed instantly. They take a long time to form. And that's just part and parcel, unfortunately, of life. That's why they're not necessarily easy to form, but if you can do it, you're away.
We've seen through a couple of decades of a concentrated effort from governments and health authorities about smoking kills. And yet, obviously, for the smokers of the day, the consequential concern for them, they didn't see it happening, because obviously it was like the frog being boiled in the pot. It doesn't know until it's done that it's done. And so it's going to take a lot of effort, but we call this consequential finance, right? So it is about potentially bringing the future issues into today's terms and then having rational thought. So if I'm going to buy something, what is the consequences of that decision in terms of my overall impact on my financial position? So we know we're on a journey here, and I know you're on the journey with us, Evan, in terms of, helping the population change, because there's still is it 5% of the population still smoke? And so we haven't had the full breakthrough, but through concerted efforts, books like yours, podcasts, educational tools, that we will be able to start bringing that momentum. So I love that play on words and that reverse psychology play that you're trying to do, which is spendvesting. So I get to spend this money to invest, which is really about making my money work harder for me, and it's going to give me a payday over time. But it's just not that instant hit. And so that's what we need to do. So I really love the way you spun that story to try and say, well, how do I convince people that this spending is actually really good for my future?
And again, it's about tapping into what we also know is that, unfortunately, keeping up with the Joneses, that's a real psychological thing.
It is.
It's a real thing. And spending is something that you can therefore outwardly show too, right? So it is an ability to wrap yourself up in your own personality around your spending, and about outwardly pushing your persona through your spending. That's a hard thing. So what, particularly for you guys, what is an advantage about, property is, again, if you want to put it in the same view, you can show what you've done in your investment. You can turn around and go, I have worked hard, I have invested my money, and this is what I've now got. I've got this amazing property portfolio that is growing, and you can go and physically see them. Even in my world, with regards to investing in not just equities, but across the spectrum in that space, it's a little bit harder. But what I try and do with that is that most people actually don't necessarily always need to show outwardly. They just need to show themselves. So if you're on your handheld pocket phone, you can look at your portfolio in one foul swoop, in that you can look at your bank account, you can look at your equities, you can look at your property all in one area and see it growing. That's the trigger that most people need. That's all they need. And that's just getting to that scenario is about, again, finding the different trigger joy that gets you to actually make the decision and the behavior that you need to do.
Nice little segue there for Wealth Clock too, Ben. But look, I wanted to congratulate. We're going to be remiss of us to not talk about the current economy whilst we've got you, Evan. But I think it's worth, there's a whole bunch of other stuff that we haven't covered today. There's money, personalities, there's identities. You go into depth around the biases. There's a bucket strategy that you talk about. There's a really big chapter on culture and how that impacts like two people in the same scenario, but coming from different cultures. So I think it's what I love about this book and what I think is different is it's a bit of wisdom literature in the investment space, because if you're someone who is biased like us towards property, it's relevant. If you're someone who's biased towards equities or bonds, it's relevant. It's actually just a good, like I said, a bit of wisdom to go, that's why I'm on the course. That's why I'm on the path. It's, you're not giving, you do give an example of dollar cost averaging in here, but it's not a nuts and bolts on how to invest. It's a nuts and bolts on getting the headspace right, which is the biggest derailer that anyone has on trying to get some success.
To finish the book and summarize what you perfectly said there, Bryce, is that my whole concept with the book was to say, you are you, I am me. What you are doing and how you're doing it is right for you. What I am doing and how I'm doing it is right for me. I don't want to, and I didn't want to write a book that, particularly in personal finance, so not side property, but inside of personal finance, there is unfortunately a fairly strong narrative in those books. This is the way, right? And I know people love to be told what to do, and I get that. What I wanted to show is that I think you can take many different principles and put them together to help you are you. What is the best for you? And that's what I'm trying to get in that book, is to go, these are all these concepts. These are all these different things. These are all these different behaviors and emotions that you'll have. If you can work out which one is you, and then identify from my book also strategies that help that personal idea that you have, you or you can get further towards what your money goal happens to be, whatever that is.
And you've done a great job in it, because I could tell you that I could pick this book up in 25, 30 years' time, and I can see those same patterns and some of those principles are timeless. And we've got to overcome some of the challenges associated with that. So, mate, well done on the book. Hey, obviously I'm mad about the economy and all of that type of thing. So I'm going to lead off with the economic question. And the first one is obviously cash rate up on Tuesday. Where do we see ourselves going? Because I've got a few things that I've put out there in terms of, I think we're close, but I'm really interested in your view.
Definitely close. So again, when we're recording this is actually the 8th of March. And why I say that is that the presentation from Philip Lowe to the Australian Financial Review's Business Summit this morning around inflation was incredibly telling. It moved markets, in fact. And it showed that he is talking directly about where inflation's at, where it's happening, what is going on, and his belief that it's peaked. And then he also talks about, the data of late is showing that this has taken effect. You've already highlighted it, both of you. You highlighted the effect on, household savings rates we saw in the national accounts. It's back below pre-COVID levels. I even do, it's not even the taxi test anymore. I call it the cafe test. I know the two of you would go down to your local cafe, sit down, and like I do, shut up and just listen. And it's all anybody is talking about, right? It is all, and that shows you it's working, which means, in my view, we are near the peak, because again, it's that old adage that if you hear your taxi driver talking about something, it's probably about the time that it switches. And that's the next thing, because what we also know, the 880,000 people they keep talking about that are on fixed rate mortgages, the roll off in the majority is between May and July. The biggest one is actually in June. So if you look at what's happened in the economy and what's happening from the communication and then what's happening in the market, April now is no longer live, according to the market. Today, again, the 8th of March, it is saying that there's now only a 39% possibility that they'll raise the cash rate by 25 basis points, which brings May into sharp configuration. Interesting time to be raising another 25 bips when you've got, I think off the top of my head, it's 180,000 of that 880 rolling off the month after. So why wouldn't you wait a little bit longer? So they're still going to raise rates. It's still going to get to, in my view, 3.85%. But it will probably be August, September. And that's when it will peak out. And that's normally what happens, which is that they will have 3 quarters to go by. First quarter, second quarter, September rise. They'll get the third quarter data in November. Christmas is interesting. My view is this time next year, you and I are going to be talking about the fact that rates are on the way down. Like, my view is that come this time next year, March, 2024, they will start moving rates. And history shows that when they start cutting rates, it's as fast as what they've done this time around on the way up. Rates down tends to be much faster than rates up. And they have a mandate to employment and to economic activity, not just inflation. Yes, it's the story right now, but it can't be forever. And they have an obligation in their mandate to make sure the economy is still moving and that people are employed.
And where do you see normalised rates then, Evan, in terms of, where's the comfort level for normalised rates for you?
You'd have to say it's back at about 2, right? So
Okay.
it's and not only that, what I also want to point out, normalised rates is unfortunately still a way off. And that needs to be pointed out there, is that inflation, to really start going below normalisation of 2%, would mean inflation would have to drop below 2% on their handle, right? So there's an argument to be made against them, is that between the third quarter of 2015 to COVID starting in 2020, they actually missed their mandate, because for that period of time, at no point in the cycle did inflation actually get into the 2% period.
Correct.
And why I say that is that maybe what they should have done was do a shock and awe campaign like they did during COVID, move from 0.75% down to as low as they could get it to stimulate the economy, because they missed a trick there. And now the argument's being put at them on the way back is that they're going too slow to tame inflation to get it back. Pros and cons, and we can debate that at another time. But inflation, unfortunately, won't fall below 2% probably in the next 2 years. So 2% is where, the argument is of normalization. And that therefore means inflation is sitting between 2 and 3%. It may even be at the lower end. I don't see it going below there before 2026, unfortunately, because it's going to take time. Rents are a big part of that discussion for another day. And they are very big laggards in terms of that inflation point. So, 2% is the level. Will it hold at 4%? Let's just take that as the average, 3.85 to 4.1, whatever it happens to be. Will it stay at 4% for a really long period of time, like a year or more? No, it can't, because the constraint on the market is too high. The constraint on the economy is too high. It's already taking effect. So history again shows the longest they've ever left rates at their peaks, whatever that happens to be, was 9 months. So think of it that way.
Very insightful. So, and I guess the other thing for current news right now is obviously the superannuation rules. So,
I'm going to get in trouble here.
and it's a big space for you, because a lot of people have a challenge around super, the fact that that the rules do get changed. So they've talked about it is a very generous tax system, and for anyone who hasn't taken advantage of it to date, there's a missed opportunity. But there does come an argument for people that are on the outliers that are using that tax regime to its fullest extent. There's a case for that. But I think the big part of the narrative around, okay, over 3 million, you're doubling the earnings from 15% to 30%, but not indexed. That's the biggest clunk. So what's your feedback around the narrative right now around
that's
super?
One of the clunks. The other clunk that was the fact that they're trying to say that they're going to tax you on the notional value. That is
unrealized.
Mental. Like that is an absolute. That's more than a clunker. That's a stinker, because where's that money coming from? The only way you can generate that money you've got to pay on the tax is to sell assets, right? So that's the other clinker. That's the shocker. So indexation, absolutely, and that one goes out. But I'm about to throw a massive cat amongst the pigeons. And the reason I say that is that superannuation, the regulation and tax, sort of scenario around it is from the early 90s, and this is 2023. It is not progressive. It is not evolving, and is not changing to do and be what it should have been, which is, don't forget, superannuation was there for you to use it as a pension idea, right? That means that the assets that you accumulate over time, this gets back to my book too, sooner or later, when you hit retirement, you're going to have to start drawing on. That means it gets smaller, right? You do have to start selling down your assets. You do have to start using it. That's the whole principle of it. It's not there to be an intergenerational handover. So why I say that is that the psychological thing that you've been geared through with super from 1992 to now is that accumulate, hold it, live off the income. Cool. And absolutely, that is certainly what super has taught you to do. But that's not what it should be going forward, and it can't be. So I get in lots of trouble with this. I actually think that they missed an opportunity to go harder. They should have actually looked at the point of view that retirement populations are only going to get larger in numbers, and the taxation pool is only going to get smaller. And this is also detrimental to me, because as I get older, this is going to hit me as well, what I'm about to say. And what I mean by that is this, that they should have been putting marginal tax rates in the income scenario. And it's not about the amount of wealth that you've generated. It's more about if your super fund is generating $100,000, $120,000, $150,000 a year, that's brilliant, fantastic, well done. But you need to have some tax on that. And it might be that once you get to 100, then it's 15. Once you get to 150, it's 30, and so on and so forth up. Now, you can argue against that. But again, health spending by 2050 is going to be astronomical. NDIS, defense spending. And I'm not a proponent of big government. I'm actually very much against that whole principle idea. But we have to fund it. And this idea that once you hit retirement, you no longer have to pay tax, I'm sorry, that just won't last. And I know as somebody who's in my mid-30s, right, that when I get to that period, I will be paying tax from the day I started working to the day I actually die, because that's what's going to happen. And so my question around super is they missed an opportunity to really go hard and say, super is this fantastic thing that this country has. We should be really proud of it. It's a beautiful thing. Most other countries don't have it, but it's unsustainable in its current narrative. And unfortunately, tax is part and parcel of living in this beautiful country. And therefore, you do need to pay something, even in retirement.
I don't think you get pushback from us on that. I think it's it's meant to be.
I am getting.
But it's meant to be sustainable, right? So that makes total sense. I think it's just it plays to the nerves that people have around the narrative around super, that the rules change. There's clearly some political debate around whether there's been any election promises broken. But I think the fact that that it needs to self-fund in the future, there's no problem there. I just think it's I just think that if 3 million now sounds like a lot of money, but when the 25-year-old gets there, it's got the same purchasing power as 1.1 million.
My argument with that, and I'm with you on this, I don't think it's been done correctly. As I said to you, it shouldn't be about the value, like a notional value of absolute wealth inside of it. It should be what you're generating, right? Now, again, the argument to me against that is that people can start dispersing it around to keep themselves in lower tax rates. That's understandable and that's fine. But again, with what's going on right now, if you're a couple, you'd split yourself up so that you stay below. It's all these loopholes. But again, it's more about what is the most likely way to grab some form of tax, marginal tax rates of that. Again, it doesn't have to be the personal income tax rate margins. They can be as small as 5%, 10%, 15%, whatever it happens to be, or even directly focusing on health, right? That, once your super fund is generating $150,000 of earnings, we're going to have to take 15% like you were taxed in on the way out into health specifically. I don't care what it is. It's just that we need to understand that completely tax-free retirement, unfortunately, is not possible going forward.
Yeah, but here's the rub, right? They continue to play us as fools in terms of the Australian public who continue to play as fools, because we all know this, and I'm on record on this podcast probably 7 years ago saying, make no mistake, people, they will tax your super more than they're taxing you now. You can go back and listen to it. I've said it forever, and that continues to be the case. So don't play us as fools. When you release a new incentive or whatever to get money invested, don't tell us it's going to be tax-free and it's going to be tax-free for life, right? Yeah. So money going in, and then the 15% of the tax on the money going in, and then now obviously tax on any earnings that you're making, and then now you're going up. So I get all of that, but it's like, so don't play us as fools.
Yeah.
So and the media do play up to this too, right? In terms of,
because they love it.
They want the gotcha moment. They're like, they've got Jim Chalmers. So are you going to ever tax on the family home? Oh, well, we're not ruling anything in. We're not ruling anything out. And then it blows up. And then all of a sudden they have to rule it out. So we need a mature conversation to be had. And coming back to your point about super in terms of that money being spent and generated back into the economy, 100%. Super was there for you to live off. That's why you have to, 4% of it needs to be spent every year. And that's how it's meant to diminish over time.
Ramping up to 12% the older and older you get.
Correct. And it should be that way. But here is the deal then. If you want to raise taxes, a consumption tax, please. Go after the goods and services tax. It needs to be higher, Because if we're all going to spend it, but here's the politics now. We've got the big institutional super funds, industry funds, which are run by the unions and they don't want, they've got this big, huge amount of money, so it's very political now. And that's the problem.
Absolutely. But again, this is the issue with the tax debate in this country, is that the efficiency, the Henry Review, all these kinds of tax reviews that we've had, they are literally not worth the paper they're written on, because nobody pays attention to them. The politicians will turn around and go, that's brilliant, but that's going to get me voted out. I'm not going to actually make it through. So that is the catch with this discussion in terms of where it is. The rational argument can be put out there as much as you want. Again, you are talking about people's livelihoods. Politicians, right? Politicians want to continue to have their livelihood sustained and the ability to actually, shape the nation as they see it. And that's the problem with the debate. I get that completely. As I said, what I also hope it does is that it makes super not the only investable vehicle, right? So it actually will break up the unions hold, the industrial funds hold, that if all of a sudden people start diverting money away from super into other vehicles, that actually creates competition, creates a better outcome, will lower costs for super, because they have to start competing again. That's my concern at the moment. You've seen the consolidation in industry super funds and in retail funds. They're going to get smaller and smaller and smaller. Australian Super is the 5th largest financial holder on the planet, not just in Australia, on the planet. And it's only getting bigger because we have to contribute to super. So that's my other argument, is that competitively wise, if people start shifting away from dumping as much money as they can into super for tax reasons, looking to property, looking to other forms of vehicles, it actually creates competition, probably could even create a better outcome, because it means, if you start investing for your kids now, rather than through your super and then hopefully give it to them when you pass away, there's a better outcome in my argument for that. So I think the debate has to be had and needs to be looked at in a much more open view of what this could reasonably create.
I totally agree. And some of this sort of minor narrative that's going on where people are saying it's actually not our money, like it's not your money. Like there's people going around saying that it's not your money. And I'm like, are you absolutely
It's not the government's money. It's not the government's money, but it's our money we've right to live here. We have to actually pay something to live here, but it's our money. That I love that argument too. I sit there and go,
our employees have paid us and the government has taken that money away from us to invest on our behalf. Technically is what is the theory here, right? And so it's absolutely our money. And so we should have a reasonable say in what happens to our money. Now, they'll keep changing the rules. So here we go, people, just like there'll be forever debates around spending. There'll be ever debates around tax, getting that balance right. We're going to live, and that's going to continue to be an ongoing debate for the rest of our lives.
Correct.
Hey, Evan, it's been a pleasure for you. I think we could riff this for hours and hours and hours, but we will never get sick of having conversations with you about behavioural economics, about money, about the economy. But we know your schedule is tight and busy. And mate, again, congratulations on putting out a piece of literature that I think really contributes incredibly well to the landscape. And mate, hopefully it's not last time we get you on the couch, and thanks for swinging by and talking to our community about some things that I think, if they take it to heart and they actually implement a lot of the things that you've been talking about, they are going to be better off in the next decade or two. So thanks for coming on.
Guys, as always, thank you for having me. It's an absolute pleasure to be in this room with you two. It is something that I always enjoy listening to myself when I listen to my podcast, listen to you. So being on here is an absolute blast. Thanks again. And yes, hopefully I'll talk to you very soon in the future.
Hey, Ben, I think I'll never get sick of talking to Evan ever. I love the way his mind works. I love the way he thinks about things, and clearly is an authority in the space. But I just love humans are not rational. We are reasonable, functional, and practical human beings. And the way that we just spent a little bit of time talking about that was incredible. We've always said money is simple, behavior is hard. So why did we get someone on for the last 40 plus minutes talking about behavior? It's because that's where the game is. That's where the success is. That's where you set yourself up in.
It is 100% right. Yes, Evan is a wealth of knowledge and he's dialed in on his subject matter. So like the rest of us, we just listen. We take in that information. He puts a strong narrative around where he sees the marketplace going, including obviously that interest rate story as well. We're quite aligned, in terms of what we believe is coming to the end of the interest rate cycle. So yeah, I mean, again, we're blessed to be able to have access to Evan and his insights. So it was an absolute joy to have him on again, and I look forward to when we get him on in future episodes.
Just an A-grade communicator. I the whole time I'm sitting there going, I could sharpen up in my communication skills, because he's articulate, he's clear, he's concise. So thank you, Evan.
If you can sharpen up, what can I do? Like I can get out of preschool and maybe move to primary school.
We're just a couple of guys having a swing. So, hey, my life hack today, Ben, is in the theme of the Google browser, the Chrome browser thing is. Sometimes, you know how you have to go to the three little dots at the top to find history. You go to history to see where you've been. What was that website I was on again yesterday? There's a little hack that if you just go into the address bar and you go the @ sign, history, enter, bang, straight away pulls up your history. So at the moment, I'm all about trying to find little hacks around Chrome, particularly when I'm researching for the podcast and all of the content that we put out here at the Property Couch, Ben. So did you know that, Ben?
I did know that one, but that's okay. There's not most of the stuff you do these hacks on, mate. I'm still learning. I'm still learning. But that one, history, I did know that one.
You did though. Okay, very good. All right, mate, what's making property news today?
Mate, there's a couple of things that have caught my eye over the last couple of weeks I thought I'll bring up for today's show. The first one is a Toorak mansion story. Now, we've always talked about status and prestige and these types of things, but what caught my eye was the 30-fold return price. Mm-hmm. So this particular property just sold for $30 million, but basically was bought originally for $1 million many, many moons ago. But hey, not a bad return, even in dollar cents, as opposed to just the percentage return when you're getting that type of growth story.
Yeah, very nice. And it just goes to show time horizon matters here, because if you hold it long enough, you get some gains like that. But what a wonderful... Sit
back and relax, right? Just, I think all of us just need to go out and buy a Toorak mansion or a Mossman mansion or something like that. But anyway, it just goes... That's the ripple effect. If they're selling for 30 million, guess what? The neighbouring suburbs are selling for 20 million. The neighbouring suburbs that are selling for 10 million. So you still got the scarcity asset and obviously good land size there. It was a nice, healthy bit of land size with a tennis court on it.
2,100 square metres, Ben.
Yeah, so good bit of dirt. So I suspect, what are they going to do? Who knows? Whoever bought it, they might even knock down the current home and build.
Yeah, they've got to put their own touch on.
People with that sort of money, nosebleed money. So that's not going to trouble us. No. Us poor, everyday Australians.
Us anytime soon.
The other one, which was interesting, was the story around what Stocklands are doing. So we saw an article in the Fin Review around Stocklands, which is one of the biggest sort of greenfield developers. The CEO in that talked about the peak of the market being picked in 2021, and then they basically kept their powder dry. But now he's talking about making a significant investment and talking about building 15 new basically master plan communities over the next 18 months. So obviously that's got to be, good news for any of us who need more stock coming in. It's going to obviously allow for greater supply. And that's the biggest challenge we've got in the property market at the moment. So, and obviously with the migrants coming in as well, but that's a significant timed play where they're going to be ratcheting up, building out those master communities. So hopefully they can get them to market sooner rather than later, but also at a cost-effective price for people to be able to buy those properties.
It helps with the million over 5 years target, Ben, providing a bit more housing, and there's some big build to rent within super funds that were announced recently, where I think it's Australian Super is going to provide over 1,000 properties to the market under the build to rent scheme as well. So obviously that'll make some dents into the much needed supply that the market needs. So so that's good to see that that's happening, because we do need that activity. So there's a couple of little stories to keep the interest. No, very good, mate. Well, I think you'll agree that was a ripper show today, Ben. Thank you again to Evan for coming and joining us on the Property Couch and discussing his book. If you're interested, there will be a link in the show description, not the show notes, Ben, the show description.
I'm learning, Bryce, the show description.
Tap on the link. If you're in Spotify, if you're in Apple, if you're in wherever you are, just click the show description. There'll be a link in there. You can check it out. But mate, until next week.
Knowledge is empowering, but only if you act on it. And based on what Evan told us, your future self will thank you for it.
There it is. I wondered if you were going to pull that out this week. There you go, folks. See you next week. Hey, folks. Bryce here again. I just wanted to catch you real quick before you go. If you're new to our community, I want to encourage you to listen to our very first 20 episodes, as the concepts we share in EPs 1 through 20 are foundational principles, pillars, and frameworks that you need to know for you to get the best value from our content week to week on our show. My little tip is to listen to it at 1.5 speed. Now, for those of you that are time poor and don't have the option to go back to the beginning, don't worry, because we've got you covered as well. We've created a binge guide that summarized these foundational episodes into one easy to digest booklet so that you can get up to speed super fast. So go to the show description on whatever device you're listening to now and simply click on the first 20 episodes link to download it straight away. Oh, and by the way, whilst you're there, you'll find a few extra goodies for you, including a link to download our Lifestyle by Design app, Moorr, the home of Wealth Speed and Wealth Clock, and our hugely popular Money Smarts money management system, as well as how to get free copies of our best-selling books. Now, just a reminder that anything we cover on this podcast is not considered to be financial advice, and we certainly recommend that you seek out expert advice tailored to your unique circumstances, and everything we talk about is general in nature. Folks, I want to encourage you again to click on the show description wherever you are listening to access all the free goodies we have for you. Until next week,